The peaceful serenity of Cedar Creek Ranch was disrupted one afternoon when a moment of danger arrived unexpectedly. Tom Anderson, having just finished his daily chores, was inside the house, enjoying a brief rest, when he heard his son, Ralph's startled cry. It was a sound filled with fear, and Tom's heart immediately leapt into his throat. He rushed outside, only to find Ralph standing frozen in the yard, his small eyes locked onto something just beyond him. A rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike, was slithering dangerously close to his son. The sight of the deadly creature sent a jolt of panic through Tom. He instinctively moved to shield Ralph, but before he could react, the situation took a surprising turn. From the trees bordering the property, a flash of movement appeared, quick and agile. Within moments, a wild bobcat, familiar to the Andersons as Rocky, emerged from the forest with remarkable swiftness and precision. The cat's amber eyes locked on the rattlesnake, and without hesitation, it pounced. The bobcat's sleek body moved with deadly grace, attacking the snake with a fury that was almost supernatural. The rattlesnake struck, but Rocky was faster. With a sharp swat, the bobcat knocked the snake aside and, in a few brutal moments, killed it. Tom stood frozen in shock as Rocky stood over the snake, his fur bristling, breathing heavily from the exertion. Ralph, still too stunned to move, gazed at the wild creature with wide eyes. This was not a simple encounter. It was something much deeper, a life-or-death moment that no one expected. Rocky, the once-injured bobcat that Tom had helped rehabilitate just months before, had returned to repay his debt in the most extraordinary way. Instead of running off into the woods, Rocky remained in the yard for a few seconds, seemingly ensuring that the danger had passed. He looked at Ralph, then at Tom, and in that moment there was a strange, silent understanding between the man, the boy, and the wild creature. After a few beats, the bobcat turned, his body language calm but deliberate. With one final glance toward the house, he bounded away into the trees, disappearing with barely a sound, leaving the family in stunned silence. Tom stood there, his heart still pounding from the encounter, unsure of how to process what had just happened. Ralph, still dazed, asked quietly, "Did the bobcat save me, Dad?" Tom nodded, but words seemed too inadequate to explain the bond that had just been forged between them and the wild creature that had come to their aid. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Tom slowly made his way back to the house, still in awe of the events that had just unfolded. He checked on Ralph, making sure he was unharmed, but his mind kept returning to the bobcat. What had prompted Rocky to come back? How had the wild animal known exactly where Ralph was and what danger he was in? The questions swirled in Tom's mind, but the answer was elusive. All he knew was that somehow the bond between them, human and wild, had deepened in a way that neither he nor Rocky could explain. It wasn't just an act of survival. It was something more. A connection born out of a shared history and a silent understanding. Later that evening, as Tom sat in his armchair, his mind still racing from the events of the day, he looked out the window toward the trees. There, in the fading light of dusk, he thought he saw a shadow moving near the forest's edge. He squinted, hoping for another glimpse, but it was gone. The image stayed with him, lingering in his thoughts long after the sun had set. Tom wasn't sure if it had been Rocky, but somehow he felt certain that the Bobcat was out there, watching over them in his own way, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had changed something in both of them forever. The following morning, Tom couldn't shake the memory of the previous day's events. He went through his usual routine, checking the fences and feeding the animals, but his mind kept drifting back to Rocky and the inexplicable bond that seemed to have formed between the wild cat and his family. He knew that the encounter with the rattlesnake was no mere coincidence. Rocky had acted with a purpose, as if he had been watching over them, waiting for the right moment to return the favor. But Tom couldn't understand why. What had brought Rocky back to their ranch? Why had the cat come to Ralph's aid when he didn't need to? That morning, Ralph was unusually quiet, his thoughts clearly occupied with the Bobcat who had become his hero. Despite the shock, the young boy couldn't help but talk about Hero Kitty, as he now called Rocky. He spoke with a mixture of awe and gratitude, as if he understood that the creature who had once been a part of their lives as an injured animal had now become a guardian in his eyes. Tom had reassured him that Rocky was okay, but the truth was, he wasn't so sure. The Bobcat had saved Ralph's life, but what about the Bobcat's own health? Tom knew that Rocky had been hurt before. His paw had been injured when they first found him, and it was a miracle he had survived the wilds long enough to make his way to the Andersons' doorstep. The injury wasn't something Tom had forgotten, and he feared that Rocky might still be suffering from it. After finishing his chores, Tom decided to take a walk in the woods to clear his mind. The weather had been unusually warm for autumn, and the crisp leaves crunched beneath his boots as he ventured deeper into the forest. He wasn't exactly sure what he was hoping to find, but a part of him couldn't resist checking the area where he had last seen Rocky, to see if there was any sign of the cat or his condition. He had always been a man of action, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was Rocky truly okay? Or had the Bobcat been injured more severely than he had let on? As he moved through the trees, Tom kept an eye on the ground, searching for tracks, signs of movement, or any clue that could give him insight into Rocky's whereabouts. He paused frequently, scanning the area with a trained eye. There, near the base of an old oak tree, he noticed something that made his heart race. A tuft of fur, matted with blood. Tom crouched down to examine it, his stomach tightening in apprehension. The fur was unmistakably Rocky's, but the blood, that didn't sit right. The Bobcat had been injured in the past, but Tom had hoped that, with time, Rocky had healed completely. Clearly that wasn't the case. Tom's thoughts were interrupted by a low growl from somewhere deeper in the woods. His body went rigid. He knew that growl. It was unmistakable, the sound of a bobcat warning off intruders. Tom stood very still, trying not to make a sound. He could hear the rustling of leaves in the distance, and just as he was about to move, the sound of paws padding softly through the underbrush reached his ears. His breath caught in his throat as he watched a familiar figure emerge from the shadows, the very Bobcat he had been searching for. Rocky, though limping slightly, appeared from behind a thick cluster of bushes, his amber eyes locked on Tom. The sight of the animal, still alive and moving, filled Tom with a sense of relief, but the limp was undeniable. Rocky stopped just a few feet away from Tom, his posture tense, yet still holding a quiet dignity. Tom could see that the bobcat was favoring one of his front paws, and a faint whimper escaped his lips as he shifted his weight. His heart sank at the sight. Rocky was hurt. The wound from the previous day hadn't healed, and now it looked like the cat was struggling just to move. The bobcat's eyes flickered, filled with a kind of silent plea for help. Tom knew that this time he couldn't wait. The bond that had been created between them, the same bond that had led Rocky to save Ralph's life, was pulling Tom to act. He knelt down slowly, his movements deliberate, not wanting to scare the creature away. With careful hands, Tom reached into his pack and pulled out some raw meat, just as he had done when they first helped Rocky back to health. He placed the meat on the ground and backed away. For a long moment, the two locked eyes. Then, as if reassured by Tom's gesture, Rocky limped forward cautiously, sniffing the meat before he began to eat. The trust was palpable, even in the face of injury and pain. Tom stayed there for a while, watching, allowing the bobcat to eat without intrusion. He understood that Rocky needed time, and that this was a delicate moment, a moment of connection. The forest around them was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. Tom knew that he couldn't simply leave the cat in pain. He had to help again, just as he had the first time they met. But for now, he would wait. He had learned from the past that patience was just as important as action when it came to the creatures of the wild. The day wore on, and the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting a warm, golden light through the trees. Tom watched Rocky finish the meal, then slowly, gingerly, rise to his feet. There was something in the way the bobcat moved that told Tom the creature was still capable of survival. But it was also clear that for now, he would need their help. And Tom knew he had to make sure he did whatever was necessary to repay the life that Rocky had saved. As the days passed, the weather began to change rapidly. The warmth of the early autumn faded, giving way to the harsher winds of winter. The nights grew longer, and snow flurries began to dust the ground, coating the landscape in a cold, white blanket. Tom could feel the chill in the air as he worked around the ranch, fixing broken fences and securing the barn. His mind, however, remained preoccupied with Rocky. The bobcat had left him with more questions than answers, and every time Tom went out into the woods, he found himself scanning the trees, hoping for a glimpse of the wild creature. But the forest remained quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the bare branches. Ralph, on the other hand, seemed to be adjusting to life without his furry friend. The boy had spent hours playing with his toy trucks and imagining new adventures, though he often looked up to the edge of the forest as if expecting Rocky to appear at any moment. The memory of the bobcat's heroic rescue was still fresh in his mind, and every time he asked Tom if Hero Kitty would come back, Tom would smile and assure him that Rocky would always be around, in some way. But even Tom knew that things could never return to how they were before. Rocky was a wild animal, and his place was out there in the vast, untamed wilderness, not in the warmth and safety of the Andersons' home. One evening, just as the first heavy snowstorm of the season rolled in. A sudden and unexpected noise disrupted the usual quiet of Cedar Creek Ranch. It started as a faint sound, so soft that it almost went unnoticed, a scratching. Barely audible over the howling wind, it came from the back door, repeated in short bursts. Tom, who had been reading by the fire, set his book aside and listened more carefully. At first he thought it might be a raccoon or some other animal, but the persistence of the sound made him uneasy. He rose from his chair, glancing toward Carla, who was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. Carla paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's that noise?" "I don't know," Tom muttered. "I'll check it out." He moved to the door, slipping into his boots and opening it just enough to peek outside. The wind immediately slapped him in the face, sharp and bitter. Snow was falling heavily, obscuring everything in white, and the freezing cold took his breath away. But through the swirling storm, he saw a figure, a silhouette against the snow. Tom's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. It had been weeks since he had last seen Rocky, and he couldn't believe his eyes. But there, standing on the porch, was the very same Bobcat, fur dusted with snow, staring up at the door as if waiting for something. Tom's first instinct was to go outside, but a sense of caution stopped him. Something felt urgent about this moment. The Bobcat hadn't just appeared for no reason. He had come back, and it wasn't just to visit. Something was wrong. "Carla!" Tom called out as he opened the door wide enough for her to hear. "Stay inside. I'll see what's going on." Without waiting for a reply, Tom stepped into the storm, pulling his coat tight around him. The cold hit him like a punch to the chest, but his focus was on the creature before him. Rocky was watching him intently, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light. There was something different about the way he stood, as though he had a purpose. He didn't approach the door like he had before, cautiously seeking food or shelter. No, this time he seemed to have something to convey. "Rocky," Tom murmured softly, taking a careful step forward. The Bobcat didn't move, but his gaze never left Tom's. Then, as if signaling for Tom to follow, he took a few steps backward, disappearing into the swirling snow. For a moment, Tom hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at him. It was a blizzard. The wind was howling and visibility was next to nothing. Yet, there was a sense of determination in Rocky's movements. Tom knew that the cat was trying to lead him somewhere, just as he had done before, when they had rescued him. Without thinking too much about it, Tom made his decision. He grabbed a flashlight and called over his shoulder to Carla, telling her that he was going to follow the Bobcat. The wind howled louder as he stepped further into the storm, trying to keep Rocky in sight. The snow was thick, and the air was so cold it felt like it cut through his clothes. But he couldn't stop. He had to know what the Bobcat was trying to show him. They trudged through the snow for what felt like hours. Rocky moved with incredible grace, navigating the harsh conditions effortlessly, while Tom struggled to keep up. At times, the storm would grow even more intense, the wind whipping so violently that Tom could hardly see where he was going. But through it all, Rocky was there, always a few steps ahead, pausing now and then to make sure Tom was still following. The distance between them seemed endless, but just as Tom began to question whether he should turn back, Rocky stopped in front of a large, fallen log. He looked back at Tom and let out a low, urgent chirp, the same kind of call Tom had heard before when Rocky had been trying to call his kittens. This time, though, there was an edge to it, a sense of desperation. Tom's heart began to race as he stepped forward, directing the flashlight where Rocky indicated. Beneath the snow-covered log, he saw a small opening, a hollow carved out by the elements. His stomach dropped when he heard it, a faint whimper. Tom's pulse quickened as he began clearing away the snow, his hands trembling with both the cold and anticipation. What he uncovered, buried beneath the snow, would change everything. As Tom cleared the snow away, his hands worked furiously, brushing off the icy layer with each sweep, the cold biting into his fingers, but he couldn't stop. The whimpering continued, growing slightly more distinct, as if the sound was pleading with him to hurry. His heart raced as the space beneath the log slowly revealed itself. He brushed aside more snow, revealing a small, huddled figure, a child, no older than 5 or 6 years old, lying in a fetal position. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue from the cold. For a moment, Tom couldn't breathe. The sight before him was so shocking that he couldn't quite process it. A child, lost in this brutal storm, left alone in the wilderness. He quickly knelt beside her, panic setting in. He could see she wasn't moving much, and the small whimpers that had alerted him were becoming weaker. He gently touched her cheek and was horrified to find how cold she was. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm here to help you." There was no response. Tom's mind raced as he assessed the situation. She was unconscious, and her body was dangerously cold. He couldn't waste any time. Removing his coat, he wrapped it around her, lifting her into his arms. She was light, almost too light, and he could feel how fragile she was. Her small form shook from the cold, but she didn't make any sound, as if she had no strength left to cry out. Behind him, Rocky stood silently, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The Bobcat hadn't moved any closer but watched the scene with an intensity that spoke volumes. Tom, still in shock, spared the wild animal a glance, mouthing a quiet "thank you" in his direction. He didn't know how Rocky had known about the girl, or why the animal had come back for help. But he had. In that moment, Tom realized that the bond between them, forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, had grown into something deeper than he could understand. Shaking his head to clear the thoughts racing through his mind, Tom focused on the task at hand. He had to get back to the house, and fast. He adjusted the girl in his arms, his legs aching from the effort of moving through the deep snow, but he couldn't stop now. The storm was relentless, and the snow was falling harder, the wind making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Yet somehow he trusted that Rocky knew where to go. The Bobcat moved ahead of him, making sure to keep a steady pace, and Tom followed closely behind. The path Rocky had chosen was treacherous, with the snow piling up rapidly, but the Bobcat seemed to know the way, darting through the storm with ease. Tom, however, stumbled more than once, nearly losing his footing, but he couldn't let go of the child in his arms. She was growing colder, her breathing shallow, and time was running out. At one point, Tom had to pause, clutching the girl tighter as a gust of wind nearly knocked him off his feet. The storm was worsening, and he had to force himself to focus on each step, following the shape of the bobcat ahead of him. Rocky's chirps echoed faintly through the storm, guiding him back on course whenever the darkness and snow momentarily disoriented him. By the time the farmhouse came into view, Tom's breath was coming in ragged gasps. His body was exhausted, and the cold seemed to be creeping into his bones. He could see the porch light flickering in the distance, and relief washed over him. Almost there. Rocky, however, didn't stop. The bobcat continued to move ahead, as if his job was done. When Tom reached the back porch, he could feel his legs shaking with fatigue, but he didn't stop. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepping into the warmth of the house. Carla was waiting anxiously inside, her eyes widening when she saw the child in Tom's arms. "Oh, my God," she gasped, rushing to his side. "Is she okay?" "I'm not sure," Tom replied, his voice tight with exhaustion. "She's hypothermic. We need to get help." Without another word, Carla grabbed the phone and began dialing the number for Dr. Peterson. Meanwhile, Tom lowered the girl onto the couch, pulling the blanket from the back of the sofa and wrapping it around her fragile body. He glanced at the window, but the storm had swallowed up everything outside. He couldn't see the forest anymore, and the night had fallen completely silent, save for the howling wind. The next few hours were a blur of action. Dr. Peterson arrived through the storm, her breath visible as she stepped inside. The warmth of the house seemed to give the girl some comfort, and as the doctor began checking her vitals, Tom sat back, trying to steady his own breath. He couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to losing her. If he hadn't been out there when he was, if Rocky hadn't led him to her. He shuddered at the thought. The sheriff arrived next, asking questions about how the girl had ended up so far from her home. As the medical team took over, Tom watched Carla tend to their son, Ralph, who was curled up on the couch, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Dr. Peterson worked quickly, stabilizing the child as much as possible. She was still unconscious, but her body was warming up slowly. The doctor gave Tom a reassuring glance. "She'll be okay," she said softly. "Thanks to you and Rocky." Tom's heart swelled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. There were no words for this bond, no explanation for how the wild creature had become their protector. He stepped to the window and glanced out into the storm, where the dark figure of the bobcat stood just beyond the trees, watching over them once more. Rocky was gone, but his presence lingered in the air. Tom knew that the bond they shared was something extraordinary, something beyond explanation, and for that he would always be grateful. The storm finally began to subside by the time the sheriff had left, his duties done for the night. The howling winds outside were beginning to soften, and the snow, though still falling, was lighter, no longer the blinding blizzard that had raged across the Montana plains. Inside the warmth of the farmhouse, a sense of calm had settled, though a quiet unease lingered in Tom's mind. He stood at the window, staring out into the now dimmed landscape. The night had swallowed up the last remnants of the storm, and in the eerie stillness, he couldn't shake the image of the child he had carried into the house. She had been so small, so fragile, and her survival was a miracle. and yet there was something more to her rescue than chance. Tom's eyes swept across the snow-covered yard, the porch light casting long shadows on the ground. His gaze lingered on the forest's edge, where he thought he saw a movement, something familiar. His heart skipped a beat, and he squinted, leaning closer to the glass. Through the snow, nearly imperceptible against the white of the night, he saw a shadow, there, just at the line of the trees. It was him, Rocky. The Bobcat was standing in the snow, a silent, vigilant figure just beyond the edge of the farm, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Tom's breath caught as he realized that Rocky hadn't left. He was still there, watching, a silent guardian of the land and the people he had come to protect. It was as if the animal was waiting for something, maybe a final acknowledgement or perhaps a simple confirmation that all was well. Tom pressed his hand to the window, feeling the cold glass beneath his palm. For a long moment, he stood there, silently watching the Bobcat. It was an unspoken connection, something that went beyond words. Rocky had come back for them, not just once, but twice now, and each time he had shown them that his bond with them was deeper than anyone could have expected. It wasn't just an animal responding to kindness. It was a wild creature recognizing something in them, a trust, an understanding that went both ways. Though the night was still, Tom felt a strange peace settle over him. He knew that Rocky, despite being a wild animal, had come to see him and his family as something more than just humans, and perhaps in some way they had become a part of his world too. He could see now that the animal had never been a mere visitor in their lives, but a part of something larger, a force that transcended the boundaries between the human world and nature. The glow from the porch light flickered, and for a brief moment, Rocky's silhouette disappeared into the darkness. It was as if he had been waiting for Tom to see him, to understand that the bond they shared was not one of dependence or ownership, but of mutual respect. Then, just as quietly as he had come, the Bobcat vanished back into the wilderness, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his presence in the fresh snow. Inside, Tom exhaled slowly, his chest tight with emotion. He wasn't sure what to feel. The sense of awe, of wonder at the creature who had saved them, was overwhelming, but there was also a sadness that lingered. Rocky had come to them when they needed him, and now, as the storm cleared and the world outside began to return to normal, he was slipping back into the wild where he truly belonged. He was a wild creature, after all, and no matter how much he had saved them or how deeply their bond ran, he was always meant to roam free. Tom turned away from the window, his mind still swirling with the events of the past few hours. He glanced over at Carla, who had finally gotten Ralph to bed after his excited chatter about the hero, Kitty. The child's eyes were bright with wonder as he drifted off to sleep, his small hands clutching his favorite stuffed animal. It seemed almost surreal that their lives had been so intertwined with a creature from the wild, that something so extraordinary had happened in such an ordinary place. But the world was full of surprises, and sometimes the most unexpected bonds were the most meaningful. Tom knew that life on the ranch would never be the same. Rocky had changed them in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend, and though the Bobcat would likely never return to their doorstep, Tom knew he would always be watching from the shadows, a silent guardian, forever a part of their lives. As the last of the storm's fury faded into the night, Tom stood for a moment longer, looking out at the forest where Rocky had disappeared. The night was quiet now, but in his heart he could feel the unspoken promise of the wild animal who had come to them when they needed him most. And in that moment, Tom understood something profound, that sometimes the most unexpected friendships could form, not through words or intentions, but through acts of kindness, trust, and the mysterious invisible thread that binds all living things together. With one last look toward the darkened forest, Tom turned off the porch light and quietly made his way to bed, the memory of the wild creature forever etched in his heart.